What is up, guys? Rick Cacus here, and today we have a brand new episode of Raid Versus, the series where we load up a 6-man fire team with a featured exotic weapon and take that exotic weapon through the ringer of the Leviathan Raid, ranking it on every single encounter. And so, let's get started. Today's featured exotic is a relatively new exotic introduced with the Curse of Osiris expansion, the Crimson Hand Cannon. This weapon is based off the Red Death Pulse Rifle back in Destiny 1 and has a couple of very unique exotic perks. The first one being Banned Weapon. This hand cannon fires in 3-round bursts. It's really a pulse rifle that you hold with one hand. In addition to that, the Crimson also has the unique perk Cruel Remedy. Kills with this weapon heal the wielder, and precision kills also refill the magazine. Sounds pretty potent, but how does it actually perform? Well, let's get started here with the first Leviathan encounter, the Castellum. Now, a bunch of new raid perks were recently introduced on the raid armor, affecting a bunch of different stuff, but for kinetic weapons, the real only beneficial raid perk that you're going to see directly impacting something like the Crimson is the Gauntlet perk that allows you to melee an enemy and get a 20% damage bonus. Of course, that's going to be good with basically anything you're using, so don't think that the raid perks are going to impact kinetic weapons performance too much, because they frankly don't. In any event, the Crimson in the Castellum, well, it's pretty darn good. Now, I did speak about that raid perk. The thing is, you have to actually get that melee kill, which in something like the Castellum, when there's so many enemies, you can put yourself in some pretty dangerous situations. But if any weapon out there is going to actually make use of that perk, it's going to be a weapon that literally heals you when you get kills with it. You get to stay alive, you get to get way more melee kills than normal, so the Crimson is one of the best kinetic weapons for that perk. But again, it is more of a minor thing compared to some of the effects you can get out of those raid perks. In any event though, the Crimson performs quite well in the Castellum. It's great at just killing baseline enemies. There's a ton of red health enemies in the Castellum, and very easy to get precision kills, which are going to refill the magazine. You're constantly healing yourself, so you're not putting yourself in any danger. Even when you are, guns blazing out and with no cover, you can still kill enemy after enemy after enemy with the Crimson without reloading, constantly healing yourself. It's very, very effective. In fact, the Crimson is probably in its absolute element, again, against those basic enemies in the Castellum. So here, I've got to say, the Crimson is going to get an 8 out of 10. It's just doing exactly what you want it to do. The only place it does suffer, and why it doesn't get, a 10 out of 10, is because it's not that great against the Reclaimers. The yellow health enemies, you're probably going to have to switch to your power, because it is going to take quite a lot of chipping away with the Crimson in order to kill those enemies. But everything else, it's fantastic. And moving on from there, we have the Gauntlet Encounter. How does the Crimson perform here? Well, this encounter is broken up into 2 different sections, the first one being killing enemies, and then the second section being shooting arrows and running the actual orbs to do the objective. Now, the first section of just killing enemies, the Crimson is actually very, very good. You're going to have groups of usually red health enemies spawning out of doorways, and these enemies, just some legionaries and a couple of scions, not too big of a deal. The fact that the Crimson can get an advantage for easily headshotting them and heals yourself is again fantastic. Sometimes if you're by yourself on a side, you can somewhat get overwhelmed, because if you let a group of enemies go, they kind of go behind cover and they keep chipping away at you, and so the Crimson having healing properties is really, really effective, actually. Like, if you're a newer player who is someone who's dying more than a little bit, you may actually want to consider running the Crimson in this and several other encounters we're going to talk about, because just that survivability factor is huge, and it gets you out of a lot of sticky situations. Now, against the yellow health Cabal that does spawn later, the Crimson runs into the same problem it did against the Reclaimers. It's not that fantastic. You're going to have to switch to your power weapon, but let's be honest, that's what most people are doing anyway, so I'm not going to hugely fault it there. If you do want to use the Crimson to shoot arrows, I mean, it's totally fine for that. It's not anything terrible. It's not anything absolutely amazing. It's fine. So in this encounter, overall, I'm going to give the Crimson a 7 out of 10. It is definitely above average. The healing properties and the constant reloading of the ammunition automatically is really, really good, but it's not doing anything absolutely spectacular compared to some other options, and it does suffer against those Centurions. Now, moving on from there, we have the Royal Pools Encounter. This is also broken up into different sections. The first section is holding down your plate, and the second section is of course damaging the purple objects to actually complete this encounter. So for the first section, and actually through the entirety of this encounter, the healing properties, while always useful, it's always going to be good, they're especially useful here. The entire mechanic of the Royal Pools involves around you taking damage while you're in the water, essentially, and you have to get the orbs in order to get a buff to negate that fact. Well, if you're using a Crimson, right, and you're holding open your plate, and you're staying there a little bit longer than normal, perhaps your teammates had to revive each other, perhaps they forgot, normally you could take some damage and even die, but with the Crimson, your survivability is insane. Using this weapon lets you stay in that water and take damage way longer than you otherwise would with any other weapon, and that is definitely a piece of utility for this encounter. So in that first section, just killing enemies, it's perfectly fine at doing that. It's not absolutely fantastic at taking down the bathers, for example, but it's certainly not terrible, and again, you're mostly switching to your power weapon to take those guys down anyways. As for the enemies other than the bather, it's very effective. Super easy to kill the Scions and the Legionnaires with a burst or two of your weapon, especially if you're getting precision hits, and of course that causes you to refill your magazine. So totally good there, and again, the utility of healing is very, very efficient. But let's move on to the second section of this encounter, damaging the purple objects. Well, here, the Crimson is terrible. There's no other word for it. It's terrible. For whatever reason, the Crimson does almost no damage against these purple objects. And you can very easily see just how much it's outclassed by other weapons when I switch to my auto rifle. I'm doing 107 damage per shot of the Crimson, switch to just a positive outlook, and I'm doing 124 damage per shot and shooting a lot faster than the Crimson. So you're able to do more damage and shoot faster when using just a 450 auto rifle. So why would you ever use the Crimson? The damage makes no sense. It's really weird seeing these numbers because, again, it's so clearly outclassed. And therefore, yeah, the Crimson's terrible for this section. So overall, it's good in the first section, trash at DPS. For the second section, I'm gonna have to rate it a 5 out of 10. It just comes out to average. So moving on from there, the next encounter is the Pleasure Gardens. And will the terrible DPS of the Crimson come up again, or is all of its damage potential lying in precision shots? Well, in the first, section of the Pleasure Gardens, we're not really going to count it too much. Of course, the Crimson can take down the Beast Herders and the normal War Beasts easily, but you really want to know how much damage can it output on the actual War Beasts that you need to kill for this encounter. Well, as you can see, it's terrible. Even with precision shots, it's doing nowhere near enough damage to warrant using, and that is unfortunate. Other weapons, even other kinetic weapons such as the Sweet Business, do have a substantial enough damage output that you can run them as an emergency. Generally in this encounter, you do want to use, rocket launchers or even abilities, and you want to rely on stuff like kinetic and energy weapons as a backup. But having the Crimson as your backup, yeah, you're not going to want that. A normal auto rifle is going to out DPS the crap out of this thing. And therefore, it really has no utility in this encounter. It's going to rate a 3 out of 10. It's going to be better than some weapons that are like glitched up like the Wardcliffe Coil, but generally, yeah, don't use it in Pleasure Gardens. Now, continuing on, we have the final encounter of the Leviathan Raid against Big Daddy Calus. So, how is the Crimson here? Well, we have several different sections to this encounter. The first one simply being fighting in the throne room. And here, you are put under a lot of pressure. If you're one of the guys inside the throne room and you have the other 4 guys, usually 4, sometimes 3 and 3, outside in the big head area, you are just put in the ringer of killing enemies, and being shot at by a ton of stuff. It's a lot of pressure and you just need to be able to kill efficiently. So that degree of survivability given by the Crimson is no joke. Seriously, it's no joke. And if you're finding that you're dying a lot in the throne room, you may want to run something like the Crimson. It kills most of those enemies very efficiently. Yes, you're going to have to switch to deal with the Centurions, the Yellow House Centurions that do spawn. They're very problematic. But using your abilities, using your super, using even your power weapons on those guys, and then using the Crimson to kill everything else pretty much, and staying alive so easily, it's something that is definitely worth considering. Also remember, there is a portion where, Calus is doing his big display and constantly damaging everyone, and you're trying to stay alive for as long as possible, shoot him at the last second to allow as many skulls as possible to spawn. Well, if you have a weapon that heals yourself, you can potentially delay that and prevent yourself from dying earlier than you should have. That's pretty advanced stuff, but it is an area where the Crimson is very efficient. Now, in the other section of being outside in Big Head, the Crimson's fine here. Like, it's actually pretty good at, one burst will kill the Scions that you want to kill. Like, any hand cannon, one-shot kill on those guys. But the real question is, how good is it against the Skulls, right? It literally has an exotic perk where precision kills will constantly reflow the magazine. So, is this thing absolutely unreal against the Skulls? No, it's not. Bungie has somehow programmed these skulls to not be creatures, not be enemies. Even though they take precision hits and technically die, they don't count as a kill for whatever reason. So unfortunately, the Crimson does not trigger off this. If it did, it would be fantastic, but for whatever reason, Bungie spent so much time making these skulls as weird as possible. But we have one more chance for the Crimson to excel. Is it any good against damaging Calus? Well, it's actually better than rocket launchers with cluster bombs. No, I'm just kidding. Nope, as you probably predicted, it's trash. Just like it was trash against the purple objects and the dogs, it just doesn't have anywhere near substantial damage against Calus, which is, slightly weird for a hand cannon that's shooting faster than normal. You would expect potentially just higher than normal compared to other hand cannons, but you have basically less than normal. And this DPS comparison maybe shows us what's wrong with the PvE meta. Like, with auto rifles just doing more damage all the time for pretty much everything, I mean, clearly something's wrong in terms of balance. Hopefully Bungie can address that, because I think non-auto rifle gun types could use a PvE buff for sure. In any event, that is how the Crimson performs. Considering it's pretty darn good in the throne room, okay against a big head, terrible against the Skulls, terrible against Calus, I think it's another just average rating of a 5 out of 10. It does have utility. Like, seriously, if you have people in the throne room that are dying non-stop, they just can't handle it, if you're in an LFG group, the Crimson is a legitimate option. It does help with your survivability, but it doesn't do things too great aside from that. So, how does the Crimson rank overall? Now, of course, you can switch weapons between encounters. This ranking is more of just a rank of versatility throughout the entire encounter, and I'm going to say the Crimson gets a 6 out of 10. It's slightly above average. There are places where it's good, but there are other places where it's terrible. So 6 out of 10, it is sometimes worth using, but most of the time you have better options out there. Guys, that's it for the video. Hope you enjoyed and found this informative. If you guys want to see any other exotic weapons tested out in the Leviathan Raid, let me know in the comment section down below. Now, if you guys want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That's linked in the description down below, as is my Twitch channel, which you can also follow. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.